change is hard, you know? Change is hard, and being the first is really, really hard.
How do we shift from cheap to value? Hi, I'm Peter Goodwin, founder of Co-Create, and welcome to our podcast, The Reset, where we take a deep dive into those businesses and people really driving forward with our sustainable future. And I'm absolutely delighted today to be at Silo in London to have a discussion with someone who I've worked with probably over the last 10 years and can obviously empathise with their journey as well. Douglas McMaster, I would say, owner of Silo and also fellow zero waste pioneer. So welcome, Douglas, to the podcast and obviously thanks for your time today.
No, it's a pleasure. It's you're one of the sort of people that I've known for such a long time, and there's very few. There's like a handful of people that I can really trust when it comes to decisions within sustainability. So it's great to always connect and chat.
Thanks. Well, thanks for that. That's very kind words. And I think what we wanted to do today, obviously now we've spoken over the last 10 years. I'm sure a lot of people will be aware of the Silo journey and the great strides that Silo has made. But for those who are seeing Douglas McMaster for the first time, let's start by talking about you as an individual, where you started, and then really this let me almost say a crusade in pioneering the zero waste approach. So really defining what zero waste is and how you've achieved that from the start, from the concept through to Silo in Brighton, the testing, through to where you are now. Yeah. When we get to that point, we can then talk about what we need to do and the systemic change in the future. But let's start off by talking about yourself and your journey.
Sure. Well, I'm from the north of England. I'm 33 now and started cooking when I was 16, 17. And I did so because I was a school dropout. Kitchens, the hospitality industry as a whole is very welcoming to those that don't have higher education, that are not academics, and so on. And I was dyslexic, but I was never diagnosed as dyslexic, and that's quite a difficult thing because you just made to feel, or you're likely to feel dumb. You're likely to feel like there's something wrong with you, and so I dropped out of school with a real chip on my shoulder. I really had a problem with authority, because essentially that authority was asking me what's wrong with you? Why can't you do this? Everyone else can do this. What's wrong with you? And I really had a bug to bear with that schooling system and authority in general. And kitchens were quite welcoming. Kitchens reminded me of a pirate ship. There was this kind of rules, but there's this freedom to express yourself. And I don't know, I just felt quite comfortable in that environment and was able to do quite well. I had a fierce ambition. Maybe it was the chip on the shoulder. It was this. I was so determined to be the best, which I realise is a kind of shallow aspiration to be the best. That's such a silly thing. But I had this real burning desire to prove these people wrong that sort of laughed at me at school.
Just on that, I mean, and part of what we're trying to do through the podcast is actually find out the characteristics of entrepreneurs as well. Now, do you think, get some empathy with that approach now, do you think that's something that's driven your entrepreneurial spirit through business? And it's interesting, isn't it, that society now grades young people depending on their academic ability? Yeah. I mean, surely we have to question the reality of that. We've seen so many stories of people who've had similar kind of background to yourself, who've come on to be the best entrepreneurs, the most successful people, not through academia, but it seems that academia kind of turns their back on people. If you're not going to get your 11 plus, if you're not going to get your GCSEs, your A levels, your degree, what worth are you to society? Now, obviously from that side of things is you found a path and you've gone through it. Now, just questions that what does society need to change? Obviously, there's a huge amount of talent there that we're missing out on and we're not encouraging. If you felt that way, but also on the same turn, that's kind of driven your entrepreneurial spirit, and that might have then become part of what you are today. So it's just interesting to see how academia and entrepreneurialism are kind of mixed, and maybe that was the making of what you got to. Now, I'm not saying that's the right way, and we should look differently. And I suppose from a hospitality perspective, there's a great opportunity there, and that's nurtured some of their talent. But we've got to think that surely there's other people who can do other skills that we can better harness that talent when people are a lot younger.
So academia valorizes and champions two types of intelligence. There's a really amazing intellectual who talks about 8 types of intelligence, and that modern academia and you're doing IQ tests, and it champions basically your maths and your English capabilities. I've done a few IQ tests in my life and they're very stressful. You're on this time limit and there's this, I'm reading the question 3 times over because I'm dyslexic, and then thinking, oh, I'm so dumb, and then it's not very dyscalcular as well, so it's designed not to be suitable for me and other dyslexics essentially, and that's what society decides is intelligence, but there's so many different forms of intelligence than just maths, English and science, and I didn't know any of this as I was young and growing up, and hospitality was just this environment in which I could climb the ladder without any sort of judgment as to what kind of tests that I'd succeeded on.
So fresh face. Douglas McMaster enters into hospitality, gets into kitchens. What happened from there?
I sort of didn't fall in love with food. I did fall in love with this environment. I started to realise that I am quite artistic, and I like expressing myself in different ways, and got satisfaction from those expressions, and cooking, and just being in a kitchen and the way you work, and it was quite there's a lot of personality afforded to you, and so I just kind of climbed the ladder and had this burning ambition to prove. I don't know who I was trying to prove wrong specifically, like a PE teacher that called me dumb or whatever. He's never going to find out, but maybe it was to myself, and sent my CV to all the best restaurants, and then just basically climbed that ladder in that way. Never knew anything about sustainability, and just had to aspire to be as good as I could be. And then I do remember getting to the point of winning a national cooking competition, BBC Young Chef of the Year.
This is a big thing.
2009, right. And I won it. I went from this person, I was terrified of speaking in class, terrified, called dumb by a teacher, and so on. And then I 3 or 4 years later won Britain's best young chef under the age of 25, and I was 21. So it was a real sort of zero to hero sort of thing going on, and it was very kind of confusing. And I didn't know how to feel or what to feel, and I also had this existential moment where I was like, now what do I do? Now I've won this, I've climbed this ladder to the top, and I'm the best chef, so to speak. And I remember what the hell do I do now? And I also remember feeling empty inside. It was a very strange, peculiar feeling. That I was what? It was almost I now can reflect and realize that it was just, there was nothing to be found in that kind of success. It's kind of empty. There's no purpose. Yeah. There was no fulfillment in that. So I was sort of a bit lost for a while. And then went travelling and travelled and met an artist who's a mutual friend of ours. Yeah. This brings us into the world of sustainability. He was a Dutch-born Aussie artist and innovator and pioneer of the zero waste movement, Joost Bakker, Joostbakker. Well worth having a look at what he does. And he just like, again, he just totally blew my mind with what what you can do in hospitality. And he wasn't even a chef or in hospitality. He was an artist that was asked to build a restaurant made out of waste materials. Yeah. And he was just this maverick artist that by this point I was aspiring to be. You know, I kind of wanted to go against the way things were. I you know, through that sort of been spit out of an educational system, a schooling system that I deplored, to just wanting to like change the way things are, and like working in hospitality, working in kitchens, and being so angry at the way things were. I was so angry at the violence and the bullying and the 80-hour weeks and just the low pay, and just like it was just the whole. Certainly in the early 2000s and the late 90s, like, you know, hospitality was a pretty dark place, and I really wanted to rebel against that system.
Okay, so we got, and this is how we met, obviously through, I mean, you would probably class Joost as one of your mentors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, my movement into sustainability was through Rob Pascoe, who started Closed Loop again in Australia. I think the Aussies were a bit of a step ahead of us in their way of thinking. Yeah. But obviously, very much started that creativity. And I think what I'm hearing from you there is you wanted to create, you wanted your own purpose. You wanted to. So the fact that you necessarily weren't a chef, what you were looking for is a better way of doing things. And I think that's the core thing. And you could look at how you were looking to do that through hospitality, and how you could communicate that through food. And I think that creativity has definitely come through. So where the story starts in sustainability, being inspired by Joost, is Silo in Australia. So, and this is where we get to the key part of your work, designing a restaurant from back to front. Yeah. And zero waste. So, and then moving on to that pre-industrial food system, which you're so passionate about. Yeah. So, how did Silo do it, and how did you succeed? Because I'd imagine you're like, you know, I've read your book, and you're like me. Every time someone says you can't do it that way, you say, why not?
Exactly.
Or immediately think, I am going to do it that way because you can't tell me what to do. And I think that's, of course, the entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah. So, what system did you operate, and how did Silo operate, and how did Silo champion so many things and lay the blueprint for what you've pretty much then taken forward over the next 10 years? Yeah.
So Joost was this brilliant artist, and he said to me, he was building a restaurant out of waste materials, and I kind of was at the right place at the right time. And he said to me, do you think you could operate a restaurant that doesn't have a bin?
Which is pretty radical at the time.
Profound even. You know, it was to not have a bin. I just spent weeks trying to wrap my head around that, and I was just so impressed with who this, you know, human being was. I was just like, yes, sure, I can operate a restaurant without a bin. I had no idea what I was talking about, but yeah, I was determined to take that brilliant premonition, that idea, and do something with it. And so yeah, we worked together, Joost and I, and a crew of brilliant people, and opened a kind of permanent cafe. The building that I'd mentioned was called the Greenhouse, and that was a temporary pop-up. But we opened Silo by Joost in Melbourne in 2012. So that was nearly a decade ago. We didn't have a bin.
So how did that work? How did not having a bin manifest? What did you need to do? What changes needed you to do to not have the bin? What ones were easy and what ones were really hard?
So it's a systems change, which we could talk about for a long time. Systems change. It's difficult to unpick a system that's not good, but by starting a new system from scratch is where you can really impart that sort of radical change. And so it's very simple, and the idea of zero waste then is exactly the same as it is now, but it's in its very sort of infancy. There's three main principles. As a restaurant, this doesn't necessarily apply to like people at home.
Yeah, we can take that on in later on. Let's explore it from the restaurant, and then we can apply
from the
it
restaurant.
to the
Three main principles. One, and most importantly, is direct trade.
Yeah.
So as soon as you trade directly with the origin of food, or like farmers, foragers, fishermen, etc., there is no plastic.
Yeah.
So plastic comes from the middleman, so to speak, the industrial supply chain. But when you circumvent that industrial supply chain, you go directly to nature and you get the things you need into the restaurant directly.
Now I noticed on that because the name of this episode is another quote from your book, which is when you trade with nature, you don't use packaging.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is exactly the thing people must have said to you, never going to work. That must be, I imagine that's the one thing people would say, never going to work.
And that's why I was so determined to make it work.
Okay, and how did you do that in terms of food stuff coming in? How did you get, your milk delivered, your wine delivered, your vegetables delivered? How did that manifest itself?
So basically, loose and just in reusable vessels. So it's really simple. Everything that came through the front door was in a reusable vessel, was itself natural. There's a couple of examples of where the packaging is natural, like cardboard, for instance. Certain things can be broken down into the compost machine or the composting system. But essentially everything that came in from the origin, from the farms, etc., directly was in reusable or natural materials.
Okay. And so what was the reaction of the farmers? Were they willing? Was there an issue from their perspective? Or?
There was a few raised eyebrows. The dairy farmer, really amazing pasture fed dairy farm, all of the sort of organic stereotypes you'd imagine. But when I said, can you put this milk and cream into a stainless steel pail? They were very confused and said to me, why would you do that? Plastic's amazing. This is 2013.
Yeah.
They were like, plastic's so cheap, it's so lightweight, it's amazing. They loved plastic, which is kind of ironic. And I had to insist that they put the milk and the cream in this stainless steel pail. And they didn't get what I was talking about with zero waste or whatever, because that was an unheard of term then. Yeah. And so, eventually I managed to convince them, but it was difficult. Changing people's behaviours is a big challenge,
So direct trade being one. So if we stay on direct trade just for 1 second, one thing that we discussed in the previous podcast with Mark Shaler was the ability, if you're buying direct, the economic benefit of not having the middleman can be immense.
Yeah.
However, as you've noted, buying direct from farmers can have its benefits in terms of better trade, better price, potentially better choice. But buying direct from farmers, kitchens don't do that at this moment in time. And there's probably a reason behind that. So what are the negatives from buying direct in terms of, reliability, delivery,
Yeah.
And is that workable? I mean, the answer is yes, because you've done it. But what are the positives and negatives for that?
So why industrialism is so popular is efficiency. So the industrial supply chain is very punctual, it's very on time, there's all this choice and there's availability. All of the things that the system is designed to do. So when you go away from that, you miss all of those benefits. So farmers are less punctual, are less likely to be travelling into town every single day. They don't have that infrastructure. Working with farmers was quite stressful in a lot of ways, because instead of getting deliveries when we want it, how we want it, like the industrial system system gives us. We had to do it when it was convenient for them. So we had to receive goods once or twice a week, and then had to like design our schedules around the farmer's schedule. And that obviously proved a lot of logistical headaches. So yeah, that was.
But you did it.
But
And
we
you
did
can
it.
make it work.
Yeah, and now the world's a very different place, and it's easy now. It's crazy how much easier it is now. I used to like get so frustrated and put out by these farmers that I would just start driving to the farms, but then I was spending like half a day or more, a day of driving a week, which is not efficient either. You know, so it was a real sort of swim upstream.
But you achieved it.
Yes.
So direct trade. So
direct trade
can be done, and you've proved to run an operation on the scale of silo that can be achieved. Okay, so direct trade. Point two.
Whole food preparation.
Okay.
Now this is relative to silo, not relative to all zero waste businesses. If you're, say, a bakery just around the corner and want to be zero waste, you can do that without churning your own butter, without milling your own flour. We choose to do that. So yeah, it's relative to us because back in 8 years ago, there wasn't other, this is where our geeky systems approach would, align, but I'm going to try and kind of simplify what I would naturally say to yourself. But essentially, if there was multiple other zero waste satellites with the same values that like did zero waste, then we wouldn't need to make everything from scratch because they'd be making butter and could in a tub rather than single use or and when the whole system is online to zero waste, we can all interconnect. But right then it was just us, we were just on our own and no one else was doing zero waste, so we had to do everything ourselves from scratch. So that's why whole food preparation was the second pillar of zero waste 8 years ago. It still is now for another reason. We could easily buy in all of these things zero waste now, but we choose not to for creative development reasons. It's like a interpersonal relationship we have with this system and how it changes the way we think. So that's, but not everyone would have to do that. If anyone's watching this or listening to this, they can have a zero waste anything, and they don't have to make everything from scratch. So relative to us. So that's the second one. Whole food
preparation is milling your own flour, making your own bread, churning your own butter.
Everything. If you imagine everything coming from nature, what does that thing look like? Milk and cream. If we want yogurt, we make it from milk. If we want creme fraiche, we make it from cream. If etc. If we want cheese, we make cheese. So it's a lot of labor, a labor of love. And so, just imagine what that thing would look like in nature. You don't get flour from nature. You get wheat from nature. So we get wheat. So it's basically a holistic, whole food preparation.
Fantastic.
And then the third one, and this is where we met, is composting. So if you imagine by this point in our little restaurant, everything's coming in directly from farmers. It's coming in reusable vessels or natural materials. And the ingredients themselves are obviously natural. And then we resourcefully cook all of that. Eventually or inevitably, there will be food that does not get consumed. Whether it's inedible, like an eggshell, whether it's perished, whether it's something that's fallen on the floor, inevitably, or cardboard, natural materials that we kind of need to rely on. There is this kind of waste. And so that's where composting is an upcycle. It's a way of turning that waste into something that nature needs. And so going back to the beginning, where we get that food from, the farmers coming into our restaurant directly with some loose vegetables, you say, great, here's your compost. So they go on the merry way with compost and it creates this closed loop. And so that is the 3 steps of zero waste.
Fantastic. And so I think I recall from Silo, you literally had one small bin that was actually front of house, wasn't it, near the counter, to prove, and that's what I love, the transparency. You proved what you were doing. So you'd removed all the packaging in the supply chain. You'd made whole foods, and you'd got more out of looking at elements of products that were considered waste and thrown away that you cooked and made beautiful dishes with. And you'd end up composting the stuff that you couldn't get back, and you were left with one small bin. And from there, that created the movement of Silo. So fantastic for pioneering that. That is, just to think about it, but then actually go and do it is an amazing achievement. So that was Silo in Australia. You then came back to the UK when I started speaking, and then, so bring us now from Australia to where you are now.
Yeah, so that was where Joost kind of left me. It was just like, Joost had this idea, and he's an artist, and he has, great ideas, and he said, do these 3 things. He didn't kind of lay it out in this intellectual way. It was kind of off the cuff.
There was your blueprint. Go away.
Yeah, it was less of a blueprint, more of just like just a quick, there's an idea. It wasn't that thought through or written down or anything. And then I kind of made sense of it all. That's where I came in. That was my value in this. Joost was this genius, kind of visionary. And then I kind of put it all together, and then life was life, and I had to go back to England. For family and stuff, and so Joost was very supportive and said, you know what, like, you are Silo, you have become Silo, because by that point it'd been like a year, and I just did it on my own in this little cafe. Well, we had a little team, but he had gone on to do other projects, so it was kind of me that was just making it work. So he gifted me with this kind of name Silo and this idea. So I came back to the UK, determined to continue this path and make it bigger and better, make it make sense. Because at that point, it was just this kind of conceptual, paddle in the water of an idea. So now I was back in the UK and opened Silo in Brighton in 2014, which is 7 years ago now. And I did it all on my own, which was the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. Did it with no investment. There was no investors. I remortgaged my mum's house to get 30 grand, which was definitely not enough money. And didn't have a team, didn't even have a proven concept. We'd been playing around with an idea and it wasn't proven. And had nothing. I was 26 as well. I was incredibly young, super naive. I think there's a lot to be said for naivety. I wouldn't have done this if I wasn't so naive.
Do you not think naivety is part of, and again, I read the book and I empathise a lot in that, in terms of what I've found is that there's, in terms of trying to drive the whole sustainability agenda forward, I've made so many mistakes, it's ridiculous. And naivety, and that thing where you say you look back in shame at things you've done. I've done things and I've looked back and thought, what the hell was I doing? But actually, going through that process was part of narrowing down exactly where we need to go. And I like the bit in your book, it's like with sustainability, it's failure, 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 sort of success, failure, 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 sort of success, failure, failure, success. And that's kind of the path you go through. So I empathise with that. But obviously, that's where you've got the vision of sustainability, the vision of zero waste. Because it was so new, you've got to drive it, because if you don't believe in it and you do that, so I get that. So you fully committed to it, and you've gone down to Silo Brighton. And wasn't I right in saying that? I mean, this is where it starts getting of the moment, because wasn't it so that someone somehow got out into the press that you were opening this restaurant, and even before you'd opened it, people started talking about it. And there was a part of what you talked about sustainability in your book as well, is that sustainable, and this is what we touched with Mark as well. It's got to be sexy. This has got to be for sustainability to work. It's got to be sexy. It's got to be the new cool. And obviously, you started getting in on that sustainability being the new cool. You were in Brighton, which is a pretty cool place anyway, and pretty forward thinking. You did this, people have got word of it, and you've already got a buzz. Now that doesn't mean you've got to work in restaurant that is both sustainable and financially sound, but you've started going on that journey. So Brighton opens, and how did that go?
Well, it was an observation of mine of Joost, where, he made this subject for me, like, I didn't know what sustainability was. I had no interest in anything regarding sustainability, but he made it exciting. He was an artist, and I, aspired to do art in various different ways, and so it was just like so like excited by this, and knew that that was what would make zero waste succeed, is if it was attractive to people.
Yeah.
And when I opened the restaurant, found this beautiful old warehouse, and I'm from, my pedigree of cooking is super fine dining, and like worked at some of the world's best restaurants, and so had this ability to make great food. Not that I did, I did on a good day, but that was a very, very difficult 5 years. So Silo in Brighton was a 5-year, what I call a land race. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. So a land race is this idea in nature where maybe you're a farmer and you have 100 seeds that you want to test on your new plot of land, and you throw down 100 seeds and you only intend to grow 2 or 3 or maybe even 1. And the idea is the strong outcompete the weak. And so you might have 100 seeds and see which ones succeed. It's kind of like that with Silo Brighton. It was like, I have 1,000 ideas.
Sounds like one of our board meetings. I get it,
I have like 1,000 ideas, and it was 5 years of laying those 5,000, those thousands of seeds, and just like seeing which ones would survive, which ones would work. But it sounds very sort of romantic almost. But it wasn't.
No.
It was incredibly stressful. Like, if you think about it, if you spend a day or you spend a week or a month doing 10 particular things and you're failing at 90% of them, psychologically and emotionally, that amount of failure is quite devastating.
You've got to run a business as well.
And
you can't just run a business on ideas. And this is, this is the challenge with sustainability, is a lot of new areas that are being tested. There's a lot of heavy lifting. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of trial and error. You've got to run a business as well, because if you haven't got a business, you can't plant those seeds in the first place.
Needless to say, I didn't get paid for 5 years.
No. But look, it's okay. So the success of Silo and now taking on that you developed. So you then went and developed the blueprint, and you took that on here. Now we're sitting in here in Silo London today, which is, we've moved it on from there. Which is, so you still retain your core values. You opened last year. And you got some rave reviews, the food, the building, the approach. So you might not have been paid, but like a lot of businesses, you put it in at the start and you benefit. So before we go and talk on about the model, the application of the model to the wider point, you've got to a point here where Silo's definitely put his mark on the map. People know who Silo are. People know who Douglas McMaster are. And you started that movement. Again, we started talking about kind of a difficult childhood, but I look back and think I'm grateful for all of those hardships, because I know that if I had have had a better childhood, a better teenage years, I wouldn't have been as fiercely committed to this, this movement and this idea, and definitely wouldn't have succeeded. We definitely would have gone out of business in Brighton, absolutely. I just, for the sheer grit of my teeth, like, insisted that this cannot fail. My business partner in Brighton said, I think enough's enough. We probably can't pay staff next week. We're going. We probably had 10 conversations where we were like, let's end the business. And I was just like, no, never. Once, to the point where I was just like, okay. I actually agreed with him once, and then the next day I was like, no, we can still make this work. Because it's your purpose. Because you've taken that on as a purpose, and whether you didn't do the business, it will come in some other form. And I think once you understand how business can change, and you get that penny drop moment, actually you can't revert back to the way that business was. So let's talk about the issue now, and one of the things that I've been involved in particularly is packaging. So let's take packaging. You've successfully proved, okay, you say in your book on a nanoscale, but you've proved that you can operate a business without packaging. And let's park on the go packaging at the moment, because that's another challenge. Tertiary and secondary packaging, where you're delivering products, you've proved that, okay, some elements of cardboard, but I think we'd accept cardboard as a very readily recyclable material.
Yeah.
And glass, you've done some great stuff with glass that you're taking responsibility for, and that's what I love. You take responsibility for everything you produce, and that for me is the key mantra that everyone should follow. So, you've done that at Silo. The reality is, to change and to move forward, we need to change systems so that becomes mass market. So, I think the evidence now is certainly hopefully moving into a post-COVID era. What we've seen is there's been a massive change in the supply chain, which has probably made direct trading with farms or suppliers a lot more feasible, or has accelerated that to the point because of the amount of home deliveries that are happening. Albeit that still is in an element of packaging and an element of plastic. So how do we now leverage it? How do we take what you've done? If we say, right, a pre-industrial system is the blueprint for change, we need to go direct to farmers. How do we get business? Because ultimately that means fundamentally completely changing the way kitchens work.
Yeah.
And how do we get farmers to do that? Because does that give them the security of supply, and can they deal with it? So this isn't going to be something that's overnight. But I agree that when we talk about manufacturing, direct to manufacturers, I don't think we're ever going to cut out the middleman, and the middleman will probably work for a lot of people. You know, there's probably an element of industrialisation that we've gone through. But I do think it has created apathy, and it's created that disconnect from nature. So how can we take what you've done, so let's say take it to the mass market, but get more people? The starting point is getting more people doing what you've done. Are you just inspiring them? This is the blueprint, it can be done? Or do you think, what else do we need to do in your opinion?
Something that, before we answer that, I think is a really important point to make clear, and I believe full-heartedly that waste exists because of humans.
Yeah.
So you can talk about feces, that's waste, it's not waste, that's food, that's part of life's intricate circular tapestry, but plastic and non-natural materials, where we synthesize natural materials together to create something non-natural, is unique to humans. And so waste exists because of humans. You know, there's no bin in a jungle. You know, there's only bin in industrial societies. So waste exists because of humans, and the industrialism is that machine that creates waste. And so it's important to state that, you know, why waste exists. I think that's a key thing to work back from when you understand why waste exists. And you know, some sobering realities that waste is actually quite a modern thing. You know, it's not that old. It's not like it's been embedded in human life for millions of years. It's you know, a couple of 100,000 of years. And you know, my belief is that, you know, we've kind of designed it quite recently into our world, and we can design it out again. So I think that's really important. And industrialism isn't just a literal manifestation of waste, but it is a social and a psychological force to create waste. So what industrialism creates is separation from nature. You know, you think of cities, you think of like going to like the corner shop and getting food and drink and items that is so far detached from nature. Yeah, it's so unnatural in every sense, and that's how habitually people live and consume, and they're so detached from nature that they see this thing as just this kind of commodity, and it is a commodity, and there's no relationship or sensitivity to it. So why would they care if it got wasted? Why would they care if there was a massive stack of plastic? It doesn't mean anything to them. They don't see the damage that it creates to nature. You know, so there is that apathy created because of industrialism, and I think that's super important to make clear. Agreed. And something that I again, getting quite nerdy on system change, is scale. Now, scale sounds like it's kind of an overlooked point in this conversation, but like industrialism is scale. it's a word to define a scale. Now, I only in the last couple of years actually started considering the impact of, or like it's almost like the subconscious effect of the scale. Like, how does that change things? So for instance, agrarian scale is like this idea of like a town or a village in which everything that town or a village needs comes from the town or the village, or local to that town or village. And and I was like thinking about this scale, this agrarian scale, like how would people's relationship to nature be on an agrarian scale versus an industrial scale.
Yeah.
And as just mentioned, the apathy created from industrial scale is quite damaging. But on an agrarian scale, imagine if you knew through a friend of a friend everyone that created the food that you eat, or every material, every clothes, everything that you touch and see and feel, the toilet from the walls to the guy who, did finish the roof for you, or there would be that different sensitivity and responsibility to maintaining and managing and loving those materials, including the food that you lived with and consumed, and etc. So I feel like scale is such an important point in terms of sustainability, and that goes hand in hand with zero waste.
Yeah, because I think if you get scale, I mean, I don't think anyone argue that a reuse system could work. What a reuse system can't work is if you've got multiple reuse systems, and you've got only individual people's doing it. You need an element of standardisation from that side.
Absolutely.
Of things. And so therefore, is it about growing that agrarian ecosystem to almost then give another option to industrialism?
Yeah.
Because so it's more about you working with your supply chains, word of mouth, finding that network, and actually working on those local networks, i.e. you go someone does do the flour, someone does do the butter, you then buy the butter from that.
Exactly.
So is it going to grow organically through those relationships that people are passionate at doing it?
Yeah.
That may be the case.
Yeah.
The thing that then comes back to is what's the role for UK farming? And evidently one of the reasons why we've gone to these mass supply chains is price. Therefore, what's the impact on price? So the agrarian model's great, but what's the cost impact then for people going out and buying food? And what's because undoubtedly it is bonkers that we make produce here, yet we buy it and we import it. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but it's because as a price issue. Do you think though, something that you've proved is that actually, and we've seen this in products as well, actually there would be support for that localism and agrarian society. If people knew they were paying to the community and supporting the community as opposed to paying a faceless corporation.
Yeah, exactly.
That actually they've got no real understanding of what their sustainability credentials are. Actually, people might value that more because they value the relationship, they value the local produce, and therefore the whole economic model does become more real.
Yeah.
Is that so? Do you agree? So both businesses and consumers, there is an element of a price point there.
Yeah. I mean, again, I can only compare it to Silo in Brighton. When we first started, for instance, our staff costs would be 60% when some restaurants are as low as 30%, and that is not sustainable. And there are all these added costs. We're paying more for the ingredients. I was driving a day a week, and that was a lot of money versus, petrol and time. So all of these extra costs were there, like in the what you've just suggested. Like if we were going to buy seasonal and local, and it would cost more, but it is it's not actually true. So now our staff costs at Silo are right down to where they should be, and it was just a matter of imagine a big dashboard with all these dials, and like you spin one out and then it's out of balance, and you just have to find that harmony in all of those variables in that system. So whilst our staff costs went up, our prices were too low, so we had to bring that price of the menu up. But then you're like, well, oh, well, how do you do that? Because the customer's not going to come so you're just constantly having to readjust, realign the system. And that's why it's a complete system change.
Yeah.
Because you can't just change one thing and then hope it's all going to work. You have to find this harmony between all of those variables that you're interfering with in that system. And so, if you say to someone, pay more for fruit and veg, they'll be like, no. Yeah. And that's like just turning up. It's not going to work like that. You have to find this harmony within the whole system in that agrarian model. And we probably don't have enough time to go over all the nuance of that system today.
But you've proved that system works, and you've shown that there's an appetite for that system. Because the benefit you're getting from buying direct is you haven't got to pay the middleman, yet you've got bigger labour costs. So you're right. It's about and once you find out and the more people who are working within that local system, the more you can leverage the cost. So actually, doing the 5 years of hard work is the hard bit, because you've got to build the system. Once you build the system, it's about leveraging the system. Now that system is never going to be as, let's say, cheap as an industrial system, but it will have a lot more value. And I think the value, not only socially, but also environmentally. But that doesn't necessarily mean the cost needs to be more. And so that's the challenge, isn't it? How do we shift from cheap to value in food as well?
I mean, the thing, I really would like to say is just that if something is cheap, it's only cheap to you in that moment. If you buy a cheap steak or a cheap McDonald's, the environment pays for it, or plastic pollution suffers. Somebody else pays for it. There's no such thing as cheap food.
No, and there's no connection with cheap food as well from that side of things. Well, that's great. I think that what I'd like to finish up on is, obviously you've gone through that great journey, and I've watched it with fascination. It's been really good, because it's kind of my kind of time in sustainability has been mirrored by yours.
Mirrored,
it's been great.
We've gone the same journey.
Yeah, same challenges, same empathies, and all that kind of stuff. So, in terms of, you've obviously achieved a hell of a lot, and you've obviously got to the point where you've now got the blueprint down. You wrote a fantastic book, which I would recommend everyone to read. But we're now at a point where kind of that's not done, because it's never done. That's really just one seed. That approach has got to be taken up. But what's your purpose now? And what are your plans moving forward about driving this forward?
So I guess accessibility. We are, if you think about the sort of, we created this blueprint, just me and like a bunch of people around me, and how that feeds into the industry. And this is specific to hospitality, but it is very, very international. I've often been doing talks and dinners all over the world talking about this system. And I'm seeing now, particularly in the last couple of years, that people are really adopting these ideas, and it is filtering down into the system. And that is wonderful. And that's just, I guess the blueprint is becoming more and more accessible, because sometimes if it's people reading the Silo book, or I don't know, a podcast about what I've done with Silo, it feels quite lofty. It feels quite like, oh, I don't want to go through what he went through. That sounds stressful. And that's so it's not accessible. It's not very realistic to people. And so trying to make it more and more like welcoming and approachable is a sort of mission that I've been sort of on for the last few years. The book was again very sort of readable, very accessible in that it was, anyone could buy a book. But again, the content within it was quite, I wanted to be brutally honest. And it is, change is hard, change is hard. And being the first is really, really hard. And it does get easier as it goes down, as it filters into the system. And it is filtering into the system. And like I mentioned on the whole food preparation bit, that is greatly where all of my stress comes from. It's like the chefs in Silo having to do everything like that. It's very, very stressful. But not everyone has to do that, you know. So again, the idea becomes more accessible, and then there's a whole this. We're talking about this specific system, but this whole movement goes into lifestyle, and it goes into, like, you know, so many different behaviors socially. And something that I'm working on now is the Zero Waste Cooking School.
Okay, tell us.
Yeah, so
yeah,
it's basically this thought process of, like, how do we make these ideas more accessible? And it's basically just like a free online cooking school on YouTube and Instagram. Just type Zero Waste Cooking School, and basically we just do dozens of videos that will be a home recipe, or we'll be looking at a particular idea in silo, like the bread, or a supply chain, or a farmer. And each video is just a really entertaining 7 minutes or a few minutes on Instagram, an entertaining look at, like, what we do, and little home recipes. And there's just these little nuggets of zero waste wisdom in each video, so it's not overwhelming, and it's just easy to sort of absorb slowly but surely.
And make it cool, and make it sexy, make it accessible, make it on the right formats, the bite-sized chunks that people want to watch.
Yeah.
And that's it's spreading the message. You've got the message, you know, now spread it. So, well, that's great. Well, I look forward to.
So it's going from kind of abstract, conceptual, lofty restaurant to like much more accessible. Everyone in the world can watch a YouTube episode, you know.
And that's the part of challenge of sustainability, isn't it? You know, it can't just be a niche thing that we discuss here and we have ideas. It's got to go into the mainstream. We've got to get people around the meal table at home talking about it, talking about these issues. It is a mainstream issue, and I think there's a lot of engagement there. So thanks for that, Doug. That's been absolutely fantastic. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
It's great seeing your success. I wish you every success for the future.
Yeah, thank you.
As someone commented in the book, the world needs a lot more Doug McMasters, and they do, because, you know, you've found your purpose, and you've pushed that through with true spirit. You've got to the point. You've achieved this, and I think there's still a lot more to achieve. But you know, sitting here 10 years after we met in a coffee shop in Brighton to discuss ideas about what was happening in Australia, I think a lot has happened. And like you said, I think that change is starting. And I now, you know, foresee these little ecosystems, these direct-to-farm, direct-to-producer relationships. I think there's an appetite for that for the consumer. If we can make that cool, and we can connect them with nature and make that cool and increase their well-being, then I think, you know, those 5 hard years that you're doing in Brighton and all this kind of through will be worth it, because there will be an outcome for that.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to find out about Silo in London, I take it you've got Instagram and websites and all that kind of stuff. Is it silolondon.com?
Silolondon.com and Silo London on Instagram. Yeah.
Well, I you know, anyone who's interested, there's also the book is available on the website as well. That's a fantastic read, really good stuff.
Thank you very much.
So I wish you all the success for the future, and
Thanks, Pete.
you know, hopefully in 10 years' time we'll be sitting here talking about another 10 years of development.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.